Hi, Year 10. Welcome back to another Friday lesson. I hope you're doing well and you and your families are staying healthy and keeping cheerful. Our poem this week is Bamp from this book by Jonathan Edwards, My Family and Other Superheroes. So most of the poems in the book are about either family members or in some cases celebrities and famous people. And this one is about a granddad. We don't know for sure if it's the writer's granddad, it might be. Here's the poem. Bump. That's him with the tweed and corduroy skin, wearing the slack gloves of his hands, those liver spots like big full stops. That's him passing time with his favourite hobby, which is, pottering or staring closely at the middle distance, enjoying the magic tricks his watch does. His pockets are for special things he has forgotten. No one fills the holes in crumpets like he does. And in his wallet is a license from the Queen. And what it means is he can say what the hell he likes and you can't do nothing. That's him, with a cupboard full of tea cosies, a severe hearing problem round those he doesn't like, gaps in his smile and stories, a head full of buried treasure. And look, that's him now, twiddling his thumbs so furiously it's like he's knitting air. It's only him can hold the air together. Okay, so hopefully it goes without saying that as we enter about our 7th week of lockdown and school being closed, that I'm missing working with you as a group. And although obviously you're all diligently doing schoolwork at home, one of the things I miss about being in school is the way that it allows us to work together. You can't work as effectively on your own as you can as part of a group, as part of a class. So one of the things that I enjoyed this week was the way in which actually there was a little sense of you working together, even though you were apart, because lots of times if one student asked a question about a certain bit in the poem, as I was going through your comments, I found sometimes in the very next comment that I read, another student would give the answer, which was great. So as we go through the poem today, what I want to do is to use those questions and answers as a structure, really. So we'll go through the poem bit by bit like we normally do, but the structure for doing that is kind of built around the things that you guys said, the questions that you asked, and the answers that you, without knowing, have given each other. So we'll start doing that now. Okay, so before we sort of get into the little different sections of the poem, a couple of people are asking questions about how the poem's put together overall. Here we go. So, the first one you can see on the screen. Why does this poem use enjambment, and what is the effect? And there's 3 question marks there, so you can see that person really wanted to know. And the next question asks the same thing in a different way. So if you're wondering what enjambment is, well, this next question will tell you. In this poem, the stanzas roll into each other and lines are spread across multiple stanzas. What is the effect of this? And what's the writer trying to achieve by doing it? Well, actually, a line where there's a full stop or the sentence ends at the end of a line, we call those end stop lines. And maybe in traditional poetry, you'd get a lot of those, but most poets writing now tend to use those sorts of lines sparingly. I think because they don't want to necessarily, although they're using structure, they don't want to necessarily draw attention to that structure of the poem. And so, you get quite commonly then these lines where a sentence will flow from one line to the next. And what that produces is something that's speech-like. And I think lots of the poems in this book and lots of contemporary poems are meant to be like conversation and using enjambment, or just, I don't know if poets would necessarily think, right, I'm going to use enjambment today, but just letting those lines flow rather than end stopping them in a rigid way makes the speech of the poem sound more natural, more like real speech. So that's one thing. But the other thing it allows the writer to do is to make use of line breaks, because if your line break is partway through a sentence, you can use that for effect. Let's look at a couple of examples in this poem. So here, his pockets are for special things he has forgotten. So that slight pause that the line break gives you, or if you're reading the poem silently, the way in which you get to the end, his pockets are for special things, and you take in that thought before you move on, he has forgotten. And it allows the writer to give you something unexpected. We've built up for special things like it's going to be something important. No, it's forgotten. It's not something important. So it allows the writer to create that effect. Or let's look at another example. If we can, yes, they can use line breaks to create humour. So a severe hearing problem. Oh dear, that's a problem. Round nose he doesn't like. And that pause of the line break just allows a little bit of timing almost to make that joke work. This grandfather hasn't necessarily got a real hearing problem. He pretends he can't hear people he doesn't like, and the line break gives a bit of emphasis to that, allows that humour to work. That's sort of the enjambment and the stanzas rolling into each other. Related to that, another student pointed out that this poem has quite a lot of stopping points, commas, although the sentences are long, coming in the middle of lines, or sometimes full stops in the middle of lines as well. And that student suggested that it takes you into, or it imitates, the slow pace at which this grandfather goes through life. Well, I think he might be right. And the fact that those pauses come at different points in the lines, rather than predictably at the end of lines, as you might expect in a more old-fashioned poem, maybe that says something about the pace of the grandfather's life as well. It isn't predictable, it isn't regimented, it doesn't move to any timetable, because often for retired people, or for people who are living under lockdown for that matter, the sort of routine disappears and you don't have that predictable pace. So there was another question about structure as well, about the viewpoint of the poem, the pronouns him and his, and the repetition of the phrase that's him. Well, you know, him and his, obviously it's about the grandfather, and I guess it just feels more natural to talk about him, his, he, rather than repeating the word grandad or the word bamp, the Welsh word for grandad, which is used as the title of the poem. So there's that. But I guess that question did make me think, yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because lots of poems are in the first person, I, or sometimes we, and we get a lot of him and his, and it's worth thinking about the effect of that. Almost we're watching and observing this grandfather. It's made into a sort of a specimen almost, because that use of these third person pronouns is maybe not the most normal thing we expect in a poem. There's no I at all in here. Lots of you felt you were quite clear what the speaker thinks about his grandfather, but we don't ever get that first person. So it is quite interesting and quite different. What about the phrase that's him being repeated throughout the poem? Well, partly I think that sort of fits in with the book as a whole that this poem comes from. It's almost like in some of the poems, like he's looking through photos or a scrapbook, or like he's walking around his village and he's seeing people. So you say that's him and point people out. And that phrase is repeated not through only this poem, but through other poems in the book as well. So I think that's tapping into a structure, not just of the one poem, but how the writer has thought about how it fits into a collection. So in the poem on the page next to this, it's about his dad, and it starts, that's him. It's almost like he might walk down the street, see his dad, then he walks down another street, sees his granddad. So that sort of explains that one a little bit. Okay, let's start having a look about the actual story of the poem, or the description of the poem. It's not really a story, is it? Itself. So we'll start at the beginning. First stanza. Tweed and corduroy. Again, we've got this line break. Skin. So tweed and corduroy might be the clothes he's wearing, but also his skin is compared to those things. And that double meaning is made easier by having that break, because we can have the one idea, he's wearing tweed and corduroy, and the second idea, his skin is compared to those things. Works more successfully having the line break to point out there's those two different things happening. The slight gloves of his hands and those liver spots like big full stops. Well, people had a few questions about this opening to the poem, so let's have a look at them. Tweed and corduroy skin. Why would his skin be like this? Well, here's tweed and corduroy, kind of materials that older people often wear, but it's talking maybe about his skin being weathered or faded or rough, perhaps. And then someone else asked, what about these liver spots? How would we see them if it's spots on his liver? Right, well, liver spots are these sorts of spots you can see here. They're kind of, this is sometimes called aging spots or age spots, and as you get older, these sort of like large freckles that appear on the skin. So they are visible. So they've got some questions, and here's some answers. So a couple of people about the skin. The idea that the texture of his skin is being compared to those things and says something about how it's been weathered over time, and maybe hints at some of the experiences he's had in his life. Liver spots is an interesting one. It compares them to full stops, symbolise an end. Aging leads to death, so almost by looking at his hands, the grandfather and maybe the grandson as well is sort of forced to contemplate that ending. Who knows? Incidentally, obviously, when you're reading a poem, when you're reading anything, if you're not sure what something means, most of us have got phones with us the whole time now. You can use Google, you can look it up. In an exam, you can't do that. So if in the exam you came across the liver spots, you weren't sure, and you suggested this interpretation, that because we can see his liver, it suggests he's open, people can always see through him, he's transparent. Now, you get credit for that in an exam because you're showing that clue. You're showing that skill of inferring from clues, of making deductions, even if actually it's not quite the right meaning of liver spots. So don't be afraid in an exam of speculating over what something might mean in that way. No problem with that at all. Okay, we'll move on a little bit then. So that's him passing time with his favourite hobby. A couple of people asked about this bit. It's quite interesting you get this idea of magic tricks his watch does. And one thing about this stanza is it represents something that happens actually quite a bit through the poem. That you've got this tension between the boredom of the grandfather's life. He's just pottering, staring closely at the middle distance. In other words, he's just staring into space. But then you get things like magic, or later in the poem, things like buried treasure. So there's something spectacular about this man, even though his actual life is quite dull. He's kind of just passing time. So how is the watch magic? Or was this thing about the middle distance? I love this question actually. I'll read it out. I know the middle distance is the point at which the foreground and background merge together, but I don't know how that is linked to magic. Well, that question really made me think. The foreground and the background merge together. On the one hand, he's staring into space, but maybe actually, what are grandparents doing when they stare into space? They're thinking about their memories, maybe, the past, the person they used to be, the background. And then, after the previous student had talked about the liver spots, thinking about death, maybe they're thinking about the future as well. What comes next? What's after this? So, I guess, in a way, how could it be magic to stare into space? Well, it's the magic of the imagination, maybe. And if he is thinking about the past and the future, that links to a magic watch in the sense of moving through time. He might not have much to do to pass the time now, but he has all these memories and all these thoughts. He can move through time. Another student, as you can see on the screen, had a different idea. The suggestion is he's quite lonely. So the magic trick his watch does is just time moving on. And that's like a magic trick because he wants time to move on and time to pass. He's not enjoying the time, so he wants the time to move on. It's magic to him for the time to move on until the next time he can be with other people, be with his family, something like that. And I want to suggest one other meaning as well before we end part one. As you get older, they say that time moves quicker. Sometimes when life is quite empty, time can move more quickly as well. People have talked about that in the current situation. So I wonder if this grandfather, the poet might be suggesting, finds it almost like magic. How is time going so quickly? How can it be life? How can it be that his life has flashed past in this way? Okay, well, we're going to let some time flash by, and I'll see you in part 2.